Hello, and welcome to Waterways, Rowing, and Regattas. This is me, Nelsie Aybar-Grau, in the distance, with a student rower. I'm a rowing instructor here in Kingston, New York. I created this video because I believe any community blessed with a waterfront deserves to enjoy access to the water. Often, communities struggle with commercial and private ownership of a waterfront, where the general public has restricted or no access. I believe providing events such as those you will witness here will bring consciousness of the need for public access to the water. I will show you some of the most popular and successful boat races, but there are many, many more. Some did not catch my attention because they may not have wide media following, and of course, I could never show you all of them anyway. My ultimate goal, however, is to convert everyone into an aficionada of rowing. What is an aficionada, you may ask? The only thing missing in this definition is the word obsession, because I dare say most aficionados are obsessed. Let's begin with an examination of waterways, and then the history of oar-powered transport. 71% of the Earth is water, something you don't really grasp until you look at a map of the globe. The waterways on our planet are numerous and long. This chart gives you an idea of how long they actually are. This is how many places rowing can take place. And believe me, rowing takes place on a very large part of these waterways, far more than you or I even know about. Did you think the US would be in fourth place? What is the longest waterway on Earth? Second longest, third, or fourth? How long is the Hudson River, the Thames, the Mississippi? There are your answers. Are you surprised? The Hudson is really very small, but longer than the Thames of London, and the mighty Mississippi is a little over half the longest river, the Nile in Africa. So let's first step back in time a bit, shall we? A long time. We need to ask ourselves, when was it that mankind took to water? Remember these guys in your history class in grade school? You may recognize the handsome, athletic fellow on the right. Looks like a rower, doesn't he? Homo erectus originated about 1.8 million years ago in Africa. He lived through the ice ages, a time in which ice covered up to 30% of the world's landmass. It is believed that Homo erectus built seaworthy craft 600,000 years before the first Homo sapiens even appeared on Earth. We don't know what type of transport he used, whether he floated on a raft, a log fashioned into a canoe, or a boat of some kind. The development of watercraft is impossible to trace, actually. Suffice it to say, we have been tooling around on water for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, let's go into rowing history, shall we? First, have you ever asked yourself this question? Sounds good. But then, What is an oar? Excellent. Now, where and when did we first see that oars were used to propel boats? Egypt, between 1560 and 1530 BC. Historians have found many ancient artifacts showing people rowing on their waterways. Rowing had to have existed at least 3,500 years ago. Yes, the Nile River in Egypt, probably the longest river on Earth, flows north all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. The north-flowing current is matched by south-blowing winds. Therefore, boats and barges can row north with the current and sail south with the wind. Again, time passes. Years and years and years of the practice of rowing developed, while the design and engineering of oars and boats slowly advanced. Flash forward 800 plus years, and rowing would be used not only as a means of transport, but as a force in the conquest of trade routes and land. The power of the human body leveraged against water, a force to be reckoned with. By that time, the Phoenicians had designed the bireme, an ancient oared warship with 2 decks of oars. Power of 2 is greater than 1, of course. Efficiency was doubled. However, according to the ancient Greek historian Thucydides, it was the Corinthians who first developed the trireme, possibly as early as the 7th century BC. A trireme is an ancient oar-driven warship, long and slender, about 120 to 130 feet long, with 3 tiers of oars. On the bow was a battering ram that was used to destroy enemy ships. The tip of the ram was made of bronze and could easily slice through the side of a wooden ship. Powered by as many as 85 oarsmen on each side, the trireme was capable of a speed of 7 knots, about 8 miles per hour. This is Olympias. It is the only replica of a trireme today. I must tell you about Olympias because it was the result of 4 aficionados who brought it to life. John F. Coates, naval architect, developed drawings that he would discuss at length with historian and author J.S. Morrison. The work was also advised by the classics teacher, Sir Charles Willink, on evidence he gained from Greek literature, history of art, and archaeology. Finance came from the Hellenic Navy and donors such as Frank Welsh, a banker and well-known author, as you see here. Together with Welsh, Morrison, Coates, and Willink founded the Trireme Trust. Their collaboration resulted in the building and launch in 1987 of the Olympias, powered in accordance with the ancient evidence by 170 oars arranged over 3 levels. Now I want to show you some video clips I think you will enjoy. First, showing the volunteer rowers recruited from around the world that were trained for a series of sea trials. The first shows the volunteers training on land, on a structure simulating the stroke needed inside the vessel. This makes it easier for coaches to monitor and correct the movements of the rowers. The second shows the volunteers inside the boat, rowing. And the final clip is a time lapse of the launch in 1987.
Malcolm, pull your orange. Oh, yeah, that helps.
Instead of a cox calling out the stroke positions, you can hear the sound of a flute, which helps the rowers stay in sync. Wow! As you can imagine, triremes were versatile vehicles of destruction and were used for centuries, from the famous Battle of Salamis, pictured here in 480 BC, through the Battle of Lepanto in 1570 AD. Rowing was a central part of life on Earth. But 300 years before Lepanto, before the end of galley warfare, in 1274, we find the first reference to a regatta in Venice. The etymology of the word is uncertain, but it probably derives from aurigare, a verb used in the 16th century as a synonym for racing, and since then the term has come to mean a boat race in all the main European languages. The first regatta in Venice happened over 700 years ago, folks. It was created to celebrate La Festa de la Marie on Candlemas Day. Today, this regatta, called the Regatta Storica, consists of a colorful parade followed by 4 races. The races are divided in terms of the type of craft as well as the age of rowers. Let's have a look at the type of craft in this regatta. The type of craft in Venice, of course, is the gondola. Gondolas are regulated by hundreds of years of history, which were written into law by the Magistrato alla Pompe. Gondolas are built according to extremely strict criteria. The bow must be 0.94 inches narrower than the stern, and the craft must be exactly 35.27 feet long, with an internal width of 4.57 feet. A flat bottom allows the gondola to skim the canals only centimeters deep, and the use of an oar allows gondoliers to propel the boats in deeper water. This, plus a slightly higher port side wall, balances the weight of the gondolier. The ferro is the curving metal piece at the bow. It acts as a counterweight to the gondolier who rows from the stern, which helps to keep the gondola's flat bottom level on the water. The other metal piece, the rizzo, is an ornamental piece in the shape of a seahorse at the stern. The oarlock, or forcola, is made of cured walnut wood, bent like a boomerang, and notched to offer different nooks in which to place the oar for different kinds of rowing. During the 16th century, there were an estimated 10,000 gondolas in Venice. Today there are only 425. The gondoliers are licensed by a guild that requires a stringent, comprehensive exam. Only 3 or 4 licenses are issued each year, and traditionally these licenses are passed down from father to son through a family. By the way, an Italian study showed that the amount of energy a gondolier expends to row himself and 2 passengers is equal to the energy expended by 1 person walking at the same speed. So here are some of the boats used in the parade and races, with all similar gondola design. First, you'll see these larger ceremonial boats leading the parade and races. Then there is the elegant puparini, with up to 4 oarsmen. The mascaretta, popular with masked prostitutes. Really? Also from 1 to 4 rowers. The Caroline, which are 6-oared boats, probably from the town of Carole. And the gondolino, built lighter and faster than the commercial gondolas. For racing, obviously. So let's watch this short promotional video about Venice and its annual Regatta Storica. You will see a bit of the parade and then the races. The long, brightly colored 16th century style boats with costumed rowers carry all the highest ranking Venetian officials up the Grand Canal. The race, which is held on the first Sunday in September, is an unforgettable sight and a true reconstruction of the glorious past of one of the most powerful and influential maritime republics in the Mediterranean. Originally, the regatta was preceded by a fleet of bisone, typical parade boats, with noblemen standing at the bows, armed with bows and terracotta shot, which they used to pelt any particularly unruly spectators. Today, the bisoni still head the procession, but they only have a ceremonial function. Again, there are 4 races for different boat types, which you saw before. See if you can recognize them in the race sequences. The best known and most exciting of the races is called the Campioni su Gondolini, where a series of small sporting gondolas fly down the Grand Canal to the finishing line at the famous Macchina, the spectacular floating stage located in front of the Foscari family palace. The prizes are pennants, red for winner, white for second place, green for third, and blue for fourth. Just as gondolier transported clients around Venice, professional watermen have been the taximen of London for centuries. Because of bad roads and narrow congested city streets, the Thames was, and probably is, the most convenient way to get around the City of London. In 1197, the Corporation of the City of London issued licenses to boats on the river, like an ancient Department of Motor Vehicles. Then in 1510, Henry VIII granted a license to the watermen, giving them exclusive rights to carry passengers on the river. Notice the wherryman in the lower center and the larger boat on the right, where the oarsman is standing and facing forwards. Venetian style? But hold on a second here. Neither Venice nor London were the only places there were watermen or lightermen or gondolieri. Check out Stockholm, Sweden. The city of Stockholm is situated on 14 islands and on the banks to the archipelago where Lake Mälaren meets the Baltic Sea. The city center is virtually situated on the water, but Stockholm had Rotterdam to do what the watermen did in London. What are Rotterdam, you ask? Rotterdam was a female profession in Stockholm from the 15th century until the early 20th century. That's around 450 years, give or take. It consisted of women who ran a form of early water taxi, rowing people between the islands of Stockholm. But get this, they were famed for their blunt manner and coarse language. They handled most of the traffic over the waters of the capital, working in teams of two, taking passengers between its islands into Lake Mälaren and to and from the islands in the Stockholm archipelago. They could be either married or unmarried, and they inherited their boats from mother to daughter or bought them from retired colleagues. Interestingly, in 1759, a law was introduced which specified that they must be sober and maintain a civil language. They were recognized by their large weather hoods, a special hat very suited when rowing in bad weather. Now, let's go back to England, where we will talk about the sport of rowing. Yes, the first and longest running rowing race, modern style, in the world today was started by this fellow in 1715. That's Thomas Doggett, an Irish actor and comedian who became joint manager of Drury Lane Theatre. Doggett relied upon the watermen who plied the waters of the Thames in their slender, speedy, wooden wherries to convey him between his residence in Chelsea and his workplaces in the City of London. But I will let these Londoners tell the story.
London wouldn't be here if it weren't for the River Thames. I mean, the Romans that rode over here and found London, or Londinium, they would have been watermen, they would have rowed over. You know, London's here because of trade, and we're in the middle of one of the biggest trading centres in the world.
Watermen back in the day used to row these wherries. Industry and commerce was all very, very close to the river. They were the taxi drivers of the day, and it was the way people were transported, day in, day out, night in, night out.
You can become a waterman and lighterman still. A waterman carries passengers and a lighterman carries cargo.
My family go back to the 1780s, and I'm the 7th generation waterman and lighterman. We are a very rare breed. I describe ourselves as London's last community. All those traditional trades have been forced out of London, and we're fortunate enough to still be here, and we're freemen of the River Thames, and that means we are free to go where we want to on the Thames.
Doggett's has always been a family, a close-knit community. This year we only had 2 people rowing the race. We've got to get it out to people that anyone can row Doggett's, as long as you abide by the rules of the will of Thomas Doggett, that you get apprenticed, you serve your apprenticeship, at the end of your apprenticeship you become a waterman, a lighterman and a freeman of the company, you can row this great race.
Doggett's is so important because of the history of it alone. It goes back over 300 years now. It's not like boat race, it's not like Henley. It's Doggett's coat and badge, and it's a working man's race on the River Thames, on the tideway.
It's a race about family honour and pride.
It's a wager that was put in place by Thomas Doggett in 1715, and he was a comedian.
The romantic story was that he wanted to get home one day. There was a very bad fog on the River Thames. None of the watermen would take him. Young boy took him across. He got him home safely. Thomas Doggett looked after this young apprentice. And when Thomas Doggett died, he left money in his will for a race to be rowed for young apprentices the year they come out of their freedom. It has always been, since 1715, raced from London Bridge, the Swan Pub, to the Swan Pub at Chelsea.
That was the 18th century, 1715 to be exact. The 19th century, that is the 1800s, saw huge amounts of social change. Slavery was abolished, and the first and second industrial revolutions led to massive urbanization and much higher levels of productivity, profit, and prosperity. A good atmosphere for rowing to thrive. By the end of the 18th century, the British Empire controlled a fifth of the world's land. Note all the pink areas here. And 1/4 of the world's population. During the post-Napoleonic era, it enforced what became known as the Pax Britannica, which had ushered in unprecedented globalization and economic integration on a massive scale. It's no wonder that Britain has had an outsized influence on the sport of rowing around the world. And the US is also enjoying the growth of rowing as sport, and racing for wager is becoming big. New York Harbor was alive with scores of boats of all types, steamboats and schooners, cutters and clippers, sailboats of all kinds, and of course, rowboats and wherries, designed to quickly convey goods and passengers from docks to boats and boats to ships. A slender boat type, known as the Whitehall, had been developed to be speedy and stable, so that it would track well on the rough waters of Manhattan Harbor. It had a reputation. Likely it got its name from a street in downtown Manhattan, but some thought it was named after a town in England. So of course competition among rowers would arise. And on December 9th, 1824, there was a famous race where the American Star, a Whitehall manned by 4 New York watermen and coxed by 14-year-old John Mengus, defeated the Certain Death belonging to the British warship Hussar. They raced 4 miles from the Battery Flagstaff to Hoboken Point and back for a $1,000 prize. $25,000 in today's money, pretty outrageous. I would say. They estimated 50,000 spectators were present. The following year, 1825, the American Star was gifted to the Marquis de Lafayette on his farewell visit to New York. This is a commemorative engraving of that race, showing a scene in New York Harbor. The slender Whitehall is in the middle. In the distance is Castle Williams, Governor's Island now, and still more distant in the background is Staten Island. The Whitehall, owned by the Hudson River Maritime Museum in Kingston, shown here, was built by students at the Village Community Boathouse in New York City. They named it the John Mangus after the cox of the American Star in that famous race in 1824. You can still learn to row a Whitehall at the Village Community Boathouse in Midtown Manhattan for free. Check out their website for dates and times. Let's leave 1824 behind and skip up to 1829, 5 years later, in England, where we have the next longest lasting boat race. It were called the Boat Race. Can you believe that? The Boat Race is an annual rowing race between Cambridge University and Oxford University, rowed between men's and women's open eights on the River Thames. The first time women participated in the boat race was in 1927. Cambridge crews wear light blue and Oxford crews wear dark blue. The course covers the 4.2-mile stretch of the Thames in West London, from Putney, at the bottom right here of the map, to Mortlake, bottom left of the map. Remember, the Doggett's Coat and Badge race was also around 4 miles? Notice the change in boat design over 100 years. Both of these are for a crew of 8. Wait for it. 1839, that is 180 years ago, the first Royal Henley took place. I call the Royal Henley the mother of all rowing races. The Henley is a series of events that last for 5 days, ending on the first weekend in July. Races are head-to-head knockout competitions and regularly attract international rowers from around the world. Because the Royal Henley predates any national or international rowing organization, it has its own rules. It is organized by a self-electing body of stewards who are largely former rowers themselves. The International Olympic Committee was actually modeled on the Henley stewards. Each race won is awarded a cup, and each cup has its own history. Here's a list of the prizes for the 8 races, 8 rowers with 1 oar each and 1 coxswain. And there are many more. For example, notice there are numerous races per category. This is a competitive rower's dream. Here you even have junior men and women's categories. Here it's all about trophies, not medals. The trophies awarded are beautiful. Let's just check out a few of them. Each cup seems to have its own history. This is the men's Coxed 4, the Prince Albert Challenge Cup. The women's 4 rowers, no cocks. This is called the Princess Grace Challenge Cup. A women's 8+, the Ladies Challenge Plate. The course is 80 feet wide and runs straight from below the Berkshire side of Temple Island to finish at Poplar Point. Note for comparison, the distance across the Rondout Creek at the Hudson River Maritime Museum is 240 feet. But let's let this chap explain it to you.
Boats, boaters and blazers. The Henley Royal Regatta is one of the most famous rowing events in the world. For 5 days, thousands of spectators will come and watch crews from all over the world battle it out on the River Thames. The first Henley Regatta was held in 1839 and has taken place every year since, except during the 2 World Wars. It was named the Henley Royal Regatta in 1851 when Prince Albert became its patron.
Heatwave Henley and a kaleidoscope of fashions, the social aspect of one of the most delightful sporting events of the calendar.
Since then, every reigning British monarch has accepted the role. It's just one of the many traditions in this event.
It's sort of part British eccentricity, it's part top-class sport, there's a bit of festival going in there, there's fancy dress, it's sort of got it all, and there's nothing else like it. It really is a wonderful sort of celebration of rowing.
The regatta runs several competitions for competitors with differing abilities, from school teams to Olympic champions.
We've got lots of tiers, so you get a sort of full array. It can be the focus of lots of people's seasons to come here and compete.
The 2-lane course they'll be rowing runs along the Henley Reach, a naturally straight part of the River Thames, and is banked by the counties of Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire on one side and Berkshire on the other. There are multiple timing points along the course before the boats reach the 1-mile mark, where they begin to pass the first grandstands in the regatta enclosure. This is followed by the larger stewards enclosure, where thousands cheer the crews on until they cross the finishing line, ending up near Henley town. The traditional length of the course is 1 mile 550 yards, about 125 yards longer than a standard course. Each race has an umpire, whose job is to ensure teams keep on their side of the course. While it's the job of each crew to direct their own boats, the umpire may shout warnings if they believe a crew is interfering in the outcome of the race by rowing across another boat's line or clashing oars. At the first regatta 179 years ago, they actually rowed on horseback along the river bank. Today they follow the race in this powered boat called the Umpire's Launch. Not only does it provide one of the best views of the race, it's also where this man's decisions can see a team win or lose the race.
Westminster School you can see on the bench station, up against the Windsor Boys School.
Windsor Boys are the favourites for the race, but it's Westminster that come out the gates fastest.
Westminster School have really got out well there. Westminster School have set a pretty ferocious early pace.
By the halfway mark, however, Windsor Boys have regained the lead.
Yeah, so Windsor now just turning the screw.
It's a lead they extend all the way to the finish line.
After going half a length down early on in the race, kept their composure.
This is one of the quintessential views of the regatta course. Temple Island and the temple on it are absolutely beautiful. But if you're racing, you haven't got time for any of that. You're worried about where you are on the course and how close to the opposition. And unlike any other rowing race, these are what divide the river. You can probably get away with a glancing blow against one of the booms, those floaty bits. But if you hit one of these bad boys, it's pretty much game over.
Blades scraping the moss off the down. Oh, there we are, clattered into the booms.
So this is the barrier. It's the first timing point on the course, and it's the first landmark really that the commentators are going to talk about. The barrier is operated from this signal box out in the river, so there'll be at least one person in that box, and it draws a timing line across to those grey posts on the towpath where there's still a cattle grid. That is the literal barrier. For the crews concerned, it's the first chance to look across to the other boat and decide, are we fast or are they? And if they're the faster ones, what are you going to do about it? So approaching the Forley box, which is halfway through the course. At this point, the navigation channel over on the far side, that's very close, so you'll be getting noises of jazz bands, Elvis impersonators, people on the top deck of boats drinking champagne. Over on this side, there's a lot of crowd noise and a lot of hubbub coming off this side, and the occasional whiff of a barbecue on the air. So all up the course there are these signal boxes. This is a 3/4 mile, and the signaler's job is to look across the race and decide who's ahead. Now for me, theoretically, I'm going to say that crew 1, that's the towpath side, they're ahead, so number 1 goes up first, and crew 2, that's the island side, they're going to be half a length behind. The theory is that you can sit all the way down there at the finish with a pair of binoculars and see exactly what's happening in the race.
You see the number 2's gone up there, that signals the crew on the buck stations ahead, and now that number 1 just overlapping.
So this is the last few hundred metres of the course. You're into the enclosures, it's a cauldron, it's as close as you ever get to rowing in what feels like a stadium. Those grandstands during the racing hours will be packed, and this is where the race is really going to hurt. But in front of all the people that matter most, you've got to dig in.
So Great Britain win the Grands, and you can see what it means to Phelan Hill.
So this is us exactly on the finish line, and don't forget, Henley is pure gladiatorial, absolute knockout. Either you've won and you're going through to another race the next day, or you're out. You're going home, or you're going to the bar.
Did you miss the regatta last summer? No problem. You can go to its YouTube channel and relive it at any time. They have recorded every single second of every race. It is a treasure of the finest rowing by rowers around the world. Watching each race with attendant commentary by knowledgeable announcers provides a wealth of information on the sport of fine rowing as opposed to traditional rowing. Although England dominated rowing in the 19th century, there was at least one European community that held rowing as high as England did, and continues that tradition today. Where might that be, you ask? Spain, the Spanish community of San Sebastián. Here, one of the oldest and most famous rowing races takes place in the Bay of Biscay in traineras, 40-foot-long fishing boats used in the Cantabrian Sea. Held annually since 1879 in the Concha, the main bay of San Sebastián, it regularly draws crowds of more than 100,000 people and around 20 teams composed of crew from surrounding communities. It is known as the Bandera de la Concha race, bandera being a flag. Trainera boats easily maneuver and navigate the challenging waves of the Cantabrian Sea. Back in the day, competition among the first boats to reach the shoals gave way to bets between the vessels. Eventually, this led to the first race in 1879 as part of a program of summer festivities. Today, 136 years later, the races have been held almost every year, except during the Spanish Civil War. Of course, now it is a much more professional sport. The boats are not made of wood, but carbon fiber. A 40-foot-long wooden boat is a bear to carry, as you can imagine. During the week between the first and second weekend in September, that's 9 days, The city is full of locals dressed in different colors to support the boat crews. Betting is part of the fun. You can gamble on who will win, who will occupy what position of a particular boat, and so on. A bit like off-track betting, I guess. Let's see what San Sebastian looks like on the first week of September. I'll point out that yellow is Oreo, green is Hondarribia, blue for Zumaya, pink of Pasajes San Juan, and purple Pasajes San Pedro, different teams, and many more. And there's the winner. The winner gets the bandera, and that's the bandera, the flag. Awesome. In 2008, female teams were permitted to compete, thereby increasing the number of followers. Hold on to your seats. Let's see how the women do in 2017, where the waves were pretty challenging. A crew is made up of 13 oars people and the cocks, who faces them at the stern, standing up. The boats are called traineru and are derived from the 19th century fishing boats. The teams must row 3.5 miles to a buoy, turn around and return to the starting line. The final always consists of 2 races between the 8 finalists. To qualify, all teams, bar one, must take part in a race against clock on the first weekend. The 7 best of which go forward to the finals the following weekend. The 8th team is always from the host town and does not have to qualify. In the finals, the 8 teams race in 2 groups of 4 across the same distance again. There's the buoy. They get to surf on the way back. Hats off to the women's crew. Let's leave Europe now and go back to the USA. It's 1848. In New York City, it was known as Sculler's Row. Mid-1800s is when rowing reached its peak of popularity. Manhattan had many boat clubs along its long waterfront. Here is a list of a dozen. John Babcock, one of the members of the Nassau Boat Club, was credited with inventing the sliding seat in 1870, although the Brits believe otherwise. The Harlem Rowing Club sponsored many races. The New York Athletic Club still exists today. A popular location for boathouses along the river was a small tributary known as Sherman Creek at the northern tip of Manhattan. There were many boat clubs around New York City at the time. Many of the clubs, such as the First Bohemian, were composed primarily of immigrants from one ethnic group or another who hoped to continue traditions of rowing they had learned in their homeland. Also, policemen, trolley car drivers, Wall Street workers were among some of the professions that held annual races on the Harlem River. Rowing was a very popular sport all around. The Atalanta Club was one of the most successful clubs in Manhattan, lasted for about 100 years. They were the first to circumnavigate Manhattan through Spuyten-Duyvil Creek, the Hudson River, Stryker's Bay, back downtown to Christopher Street, where they were moored. And fancy this, the regatta of Harlem's Empire City Rowing Club included a double sculls race for women. This image was published in Frank Leslie's Illustrated News. Mind you, women were not allowed to race in the Olympics until 1976. The Spuyten-Duyvil Creek at the topmost part of Manhattan was later widened to create a shipping channel for boats to cross from the Long Island Sound into the Hudson River. It's where Columbia University rowing crew still practices today. As I said, in the late 1800s, rowing was a pastime that everyone enjoyed, either watching or racing. Here you see spectators watching rowers on the Harlem River. Here they are rowing on a lake in the Bronx. Races were for wagers in Newburgh. That $4,000 prize would be $70,000 in today's money. But a 5-mile race is a significant challenge in these singles. Wowie. And of course, 90 miles north of Manhattan, in Kingston, New York, city vacationers would row by the Hudson estuary near the Rondout Creek. They would have just disembarked from the steamboats that carried them there from New York City. In the bandstand, musicians regularly played while rowers plied the waters at Kingston Point. And of course, in 1895, the newly formed Intercollegiate Rowing Association, IRA, formed by Columbia, Cornell, and Pennsylvania universities, began holding its 4-mile championship races for eights on the Hudson River at Poughkeepsie in New York. The 20th century would see competitive rowing dominate in the USA. What then is the necessary ingredient to have a successful, long-lasting regatta? Is it population? All these cities have successful regattas today. Let's have a look at a couple of the smallest communities on this list. Yes, Isle of Scilly, population 2,153. Yeah, the small town of Scilly founded the World Pilot Gig Championship 30 years ago, 1990, with 19 gigs. Now there are participants from all over England, the Netherlands, Ireland, France, and beyond. There are currently over 200 gigs in the association's register. The sport is governed by the Cornish Pilot Gig Association, which monitors all racing gigs during construction to ensure they conform to the standard. There are multiple races that take place over a weekend of varying distances, starting on the Friday night. The Pilot Gig is a 6-oared rowing boat. It is one of the first shore-based lifeboats that went to vessels in distress, so the boats had to be fast. Let's watch a video by some local aficionados of the race and have them tell you the story in their own words, shall we?
We're outside the sailing centre on a beach at St Mary's, and we're going to be doing something very exciting this afternoon. We're going to do the traditional gig racing.
That is one of the local sports that takes place on the Isles of Scilly. So it's in a traditional wooden boat. Some of them were built in the 1800s and some of them in the sheds just behind you. And we've got some more modern ones as well, and it's 6 rowers and a cox. You think you'll be good at it?
Well, it's rowing, isn't it? What kind of training do you need for that?
It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. There's by the end of a race you feel like you could quite comfortably be doing almost anything else in the universe than what you just did. Your lungs burn, your head is throbbing, your muscles are...
Every muscle aches.
My
muscles didn't know you had.
Your hands have got blisters.
So why do you do it?
Because we are...
we like it!
It's really good fun. We don't get opportunities to do many team sports over here. Somehow gig rowing is the one thing that everybody seems to really have at some point in their life either loved or loathed and been involved with. So.
I think it's because it's got a bit of heritage to the islands as well. People enjoy doing it. You grow up through school knowing about it, so it's
Your
quite nice to have a go and doing it. Yeah, family do it.
How long have you been? Is there a word for it? Giggeting?
Gig rowing.
Gig rowing.
We've been doing it for about 5 centuries.
Yeah.
31 years. I've been doing it for about 5.
Okay, so hold it there a minute. I'm the cop, so I tell you when to go and stop. Selena's the one that sets the stroke, and then everybody else follows. So it's trying to do everything all as one, rather than 6 individual people.
That'd be a first for our family.
And away together. That's it, just remember to just cover the blade. Keep the top slightly towards me rather than backwards. Just stops it digging too deep for you then in the water.
It's a world championship, so people come from everywhere, and the population triples, if not more, for the May championships.
We started it in 1990 and we had 19 boats for the first ever World Championships, and now we've got 145 this year. So it's just grown and grown and grown.
So you see all gigs rowing up to the start line and everybody lining up in this beautiful big arc of boats. And then obviously everybody starting at once, the flag goes down and you hear the dunk as everybody's first stroke goes in.
It's absolutely immense.
It's exhilarating.
It's like
absolutely exhilarating. Taking part and watching, it's totally amazing. I wouldn't ever want to not do it.
You're doing really well.
Do we have a similar small community in the USA? Yes, relatively small. Hull, Massachusetts, population 10,293, half the size of Kingston, southeast of Boston on the Atlantic seaboard. The Hull Life-Saving Museum founded the annual Snow Row in 1979, 41 years ago, to commemorate Hull's 19th century lifesavers. The museum was founded by Joshua James, who is considered the father of the U.S. Coast Guard. Back in James' day, lifesavers rowed in traditional wooden pulling boats to rescue schooners wrecked off the coast. The 41st snow row race would have been on March 14th, 2020. For 41 years, the annual snow row has been one of the town's biggest events. The race covers a 3.75-mile triangular course, as you see here, from Windmill Point, round Sheep Island, past Peddocks Island, and back to Windmill Point. This is an excellent promotional drone video. It is a time lapse of the entire event. The crews start the race by dashing across the beach to their boats in a so-called Le Mans style start. There you go. So this race is just 3.75 miles. For comparison, the trip from our Hudson River Maritime Museum to Eddyville and back is near 5 miles. The drone video makes it look very challenging. It is a great workout for all the rowers who have come from all over the country. I believe people from the Village Community Boathouse of New York race in this regatta. There's the tip of Sheep Island, and they come around. There's the marker at Peddocks. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And finally, the return to Windmill Point. You can see the windmill in the distance. Then, does it take 100 years to make a successful regatta? To answer that, let's go back to England. They already have Doggett's Coat and Badge, the boat race, and the Royal Henley. Could they really need another race? Yes! 32 years ago, in 1988, the Great River Race was created. Why, you ask? At first, it was to find the UK traditional boat champions by issuing an all-comers challenge to beat the Doggett's men, racing on a handicap basis. Entries were restricted to traditional-style coxed craft, powered by a minimum of 4 oars or paddles. And, like Doggett's men, they had to carry a passenger. That was then. Today, the Great River Race is for any traditional-style boat, propelled by oars or paddles. Over 300 boats of assorted sizes arrive at the start, and many of the crews dress up in fancy dress. Great costumes. Oh boy.
We are Dutch, and this is the best race in the world.
Indeed.
We're the only Australian team to have ever competed in this race, and we are a group of breast cancer survivors too. Takes them to do it.
Going to be rowing from this end of the river to the other end of the river, and it's all about team spirit and communication between humans.
Usually held on a Saturday in September, the race covers a 21-mile course on the tidal Thames, from the Isle of Dogs to Ham in Surrey. To give all crews an equal chance, entrants are handicapped according to the calculated potential performance of their boats. This is done on a scientific basis, using naval architects' calculations and a sophisticated computer program. And to add spice to the contest, it is to be run on a slowest away first, fastest last pursuit basis, with every boat individually timed over the course. Dragon boats are last. Despite a start line handicap period of well over an hour, some close racing was expected and achieved. It's a lot like a marathon. Oh boy. Whoops. Bit tight in this area of the Thames. Okay, we're getting close to the end. Waiting for the dragon boat. Thames can be quite choppy. Oh boy. It's like a Hawaiian crew. And there they are, the dragon boats. Whoops. Hold it. The Great River Race is not the only race for the people in Europe today. Venice also created such a race in 1974, 14 years before the Great River Race. I believe this is the race for the masses. Known as the Volga Longa, it is an 18.64-mile regatta in historic Venice. "45 years ago, a group of Venetians, both amateur and professional rowers, aficionados if you will, had a race in the island of Burano, and they came up with an idea of a non-competitive race in which any kind of rowing boat could participate in the spirit of historical festivities. And, get this, each participant receives a commemorative medal and a certificate of participation. They may also receive a prize, chosen randomly, which are often trophy cups and plaques, decorative oars and other mementos that local associations, newspapers, and the organizing committee donate. The number of participants has swelled to thousands over the years from all over the world. Note how the community has direct access to the waterfront. And check out the number of dragon boats. There's one right there. Check out the medal. Not bad. So both in London and Venice, it seems, you can't have enough regattas. Both the Great River Race and the Volga Longa demonstrate a great hunger for the average person to get on the water, compete a little, and have loads of fun. My hope is that the Hudson Valley communities take the challenge to create regattas to rival the great races of Europe. Again, thank you so much for watching the presentation. Here are 2 links that you can use to find the videos you have just seen on YouTube and Vimeo. And the handout provides a list of books about rowing as well as suggestions to teachers and coaches who are working on building rowing programs. And finally, I want to share this short video of the annual Carnival in Venice, an event which was brought back after 600 years in 1979 to preserve the history and culture of Venice. This 2-minute video delights the heart and shows what access to a waterway can do for a community. Thanks again.